morning, Hamilton. Welcome back to another version of Virtual Coffee with a Cop. Today is a special week. Today we are celebrating National Telecommunications Week. And I have a great guest with me today. I have Lisa from our communications department. Welcome,
Hi.
Lisa.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on the show today. I think it's real important that we get to chat with somebody from our communications department. One, because you're the people behind the people. So you're someone who answers 911 calls, dispatches police, and not a lot of people out there know what we do.
Yeah.
And they know that person exists, but there's probably a lot of questions, a lot of information that the citizens or people in Hamilton might have that want to check out, right? So welcome, thank you to the show, and thank you in general for being one of our communicators and helping me. I know when I was in patrol, we rely heavily on all our operators and everybody in that room to dispatch us, tell us where we're going, give us answers, help us out. So we want to take a minute just to thank you guys for all the hard work that you do.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to ask you some questions now. You ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. So how long have you been in the communications department?
I started working for Hamilton Police about 25 years ago as a part-time employee. It wasn't really in my field of expertise. It was a job to supplement my part-time job. I started in switchboard, which is in communications. And once I sat in the room, I fell in love, and the rest is history.
Hey, perfect. So maybe tell us a little bit about communications. I'm sure everybody has their own idea of, what it looks like or whatever, but maybe kind of give us a layout of the room and how it's divided or how you guys operate down there.
Yeah. So Hamilton Police operates off of the Neighborhood Safety Project, which is beat officers assigned to each neighborhood within Hamilton. And what they did with our dispatch room is some very smart person decided to use those beats and have them be where a dispatcher would be. So any beat that starts with a 3 is on the mountain, Flamborough, Ancaster, Dundas, and that gets one dispatcher. Anyone that's downtown, their beat starts with the number 1, and that is your Area 1 dispatcher that dispatches from Sherman all the way out to McMaster. And then you have your Area 2 dispatcher who dispatches all the officers whose call signs start with that number 2, and that goes east of Sherman all the way up the mountain into Stony Creek.
Perfect. So it's kind of like dividing up our 3 main stations. We have 3 main sections in our communications room. So we have dedicated people who only work or dispatch for each station, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
And our communications operators are really unique because not only do they dispatch, but they also answer administrative and 911 phone calls for the entire city. So what we do is we split our day up and we each share our time period. So in a 12-hour shift, I would get 4 hours at dispatch, you would get 4 hours, and then our partner who was taking calls would also get 4 hours.
Okay. So let's look at each section, okay? Let's break it down. So for the mountain, how many people would be working in that little group dispatching for the mountain?
So there are 3. So there is the dispatcher and there are 2 call taker partners who are answering 911's admins, but then they'll also make phone calls for officers. So if the dispatcher has an officer that needs a tow truck or has happened upon somebody that needs an ambulance, they will ask the dispatcher. And oftentimes dispatcher's too busy, so we will get one of our call taker partners to help.
Yeah, excellent. And I know that's something that, I've needed help with in the past, calling for a cab, something that, the officer out in a scene somewhere or dealing with the chaotic scene may not have time to be able to tell people to hold on, so we can pick up the phone, and we rely heavily on you guys to do that, and we appreciate that. So when we look at the room and how it's divided, so we have 3 people, does that mean you only dispatch for the mountain, or do you guys get a chance to move around that room and dispatch to different stations?
Very good question. It would be boring to be stuck on the mountain the whole time of your entire career, so we do flip. So if you're working the weekend, you would take a turn. On a Friday, you would work in Area 1, on the Saturday, Area 2, on the Sunday, Area 3. Sometimes you're working in the one area, but usually you get to move around. And we work on a shift with our patrol officers, which is a great benefit because then we know the voice on the other end, which helps in an emergency situation. And there becomes the sense of, it sounds kind of hokey, but like a family type environment.
So you mentioned something there about working with patrol, and you mentioned earlier about 12-hour shifts. Are you always working 12-hour shifts?
generally, unless it's an overtime shift. It is a 12-hour shift, alternating days and nights, weekends, Christmas,
And you
everything.
generally follow a patrol squad, correct?
We do.
So we have 4 different patrol squads in Hamilton.
Yes.
A, B, C, D. And so your dispatchers follow those squads, right? So
They
the
do.
people who work on A always work on A for the year.
Right.
Right? And then B and C and D. And do you get a chance to move to the other areas at all?
Yeah, usually yearly. If there's
Mm-hmm.
if there's a shift, you can move to a different squad. We have our fantastic part-timers who work every shift and have to know every officer in every squad.
Yeah.
And those are our newer employees who are hired on to start as a part-time employee, and then they can apply for full-time from there.
Yeah, excellent. So it gives you a great range of meeting officers, seeing different calls, hearing about different parts of the city, learning different streets and things. So keeps you guys on your toes for sure.
Definitely.
Yeah. So Lisa, what are some of the things you like about being in communications?
That's that's a tough one. It really is a calling. In order to take that job, you really do have to commit to the fact that, you know, there will be Christmases where you're not with your home family, but you really do develop a sense of family within the communication center. There are a group of people that are stuck in a room together 12 hours a day, 365 days a year. So you do become a family. The sense of camaraderie is great. When there's an emergent situation, everybody really pulls together. It's nice to see. And it is rewarding to take phone calls from a citizen who you get them at their worst moment. They'll call
Yeah.
911, it'll be a very hectic situation, you can hear screaming in the background, and you have to keep that sense of calm until the officer gets there.
Yeah.
And you've got the support of the people around you that are also listening in or helping if they can.
Perfect.
So it is
Yeah.
good.
Yeah,
It's a very
excellent.
good job.
And I'm sure it can get tough at times, right?
Yes.
Emotionally stressful, right? Having to try and deal with somebody. And what about, you take a call, you help somebody. Do you always stay on the line? At what point do you hang up and police, on scene take over?
We really take it seriously. If it's an in-progress emergency, we stay on the phone with that person if they're willing to until the officers arrive on scene. And when they tell us they can see the police, that's when we hang up.
Perfect, right? So let's go back a little bit. And what happens when somebody calls 911?
So there are a series of questions that we do ask. Our training coordinator has put together a great plan of all of the questions you ask, and that's all cascaded to you within the training program. But they're basically the W's. The most important question when you answer a 911 call is, where are you? If I don't know where you are, I can't help you. Your cell phone has a great GPS, but it's not 100% accurate, so even just yelling out an address is great. And
Yep.
from there we go with what's going on, when did this happen, and then we get to everything else.
Perfect. But even before then, when somebody calls 911, we answer for other services too, don't we?
Yes, so Hamilton Police answers for the City of Hamilton. So the City of Hamilton has an agreement to answer 911s for all of their citizens. And then we are the primary PSAP, which is a public safety answer point. And then we tier down to fire and ambulance. So our first question is always police, fire, or ambulance.
Yeah. Who do you need? What do you
Right.
need, right? And I think that's important to remember when you're calling 911. People, I think, associate 911 with the police a lot, but that's also for if you need medical attention, right?
Yes.
Or you need a fire department. So that's really the first question, right? Is who are you looking for and how do I direct you? Now, if somebody needs ambulance or fire, what happens next?
So if the person tells me that they require ambulance, I do transfer them through to ambulance, and then what we will do is we'll monitor the line just to make sure police aren't needed, fire's not needed.
Okay, so they have their own dispatchers,
They
and we
definitely
basically just relay that phone call over to ambulance or fire and kind of hang out for a minute just to make sure that we're not still required
Yeah.
in the situation, right? So that's fantastic. I think, it's got to be a lot to think about on your toes there every time you pick up that phone, right?
Yes.
Excellent. So once you've gotten the W's out of everybody, right? The who, what, where, when, how, what transpires next?
With the caller?
Yeah, sure. Somebody calls police, right? You've determined that they're looking for a police response. You've asked them where they are, why they need police, all those things. Do you immediately when does the dispatcher get involved? Because the call taker and the dispatcher are separate people, right?
Yes. So we usually you'll call 911, we'll ask where your emergency is, we'll confirm the location, and then we'll usually put a one-liner in a remarks field that just captures what's going on. A male with knife. Something short and sweet that tells the dispatcher a little bit of what's going on. We will accept that call through. It filters through to the appropriate dispatcher. Our computer system knows which dispatcher it's going to, and that call will go to the dispatcher. They can then initially dispatch the officers, and then they'll get updates in the remarks as we get it from the caller.
Excellent. So essentially the person answering the 911 calls are constantly in communication with the dispatcher, who's in communication with the officer.
Correct.
Right? So there's a good train of information that's constantly flowing, right? As the call taker's trying to gather more information or more details about the reason for the call, they relay that to the dispatcher, right, who's typing it in and sending that out to patrol either via the radio or through the computer systems in the cars, right?
And I have a 50-50 chance of getting the right answer to the question that you're going to ask the dispatcher. So if I say what the suspect looked like, you're going to say, which way did he go? But I just told you what he looked like. So then the dispatcher's going to turn to me and say, which way did he go?
Yeah, excellent, right? We all have questions, right? So it's a game of, who's on first, what's on second kind of thing sometimes, right? And a matter of, the officer determining what information they need immediately for the call and what information the person who's calling is providing, right? So I would assume, somebody's called 911 and they're providing you with information. You don't cut them off, looking for information that I might be asking for as a patrol officer. You kind of let them go and tell what they have to tell, and there's got to be a point in time there where some of the information gets a little clouded, right?
Yeah, each situation is definitely unique. Some people in an emergency are completely calm, and others are visibly upset because of what's going on. So sometimes we will try to direct them and say, what you're telling me is important, but I need to know this because the officer's on the way. Even just the reassurance of the officer being on the way for them is great.
Yeah, and so let me ask you this, okay, times. I know when somebody calls 911, do we have certain times we're trying to answer the phone right away or get it to the next person? You see in the movies, they get put on hold and that kind of thing, right? How does that work?
In today's age of technology, with everybody having a cell phone, if there's an accident on the link, you can be sure that at least 10 people will call it in, and we may have only 6 call takers. So those 6 call takers are going to get the first 6 calls, and those other 4 people are unfortunately going to be put in a queue that tells them to stay on the line.
Yeah, but we don't want them hanging up, right?
No, absolutely not.
We want you to stay patient. You've taken the time to call 911. Stay on the line. Wait for somebody because, you may have some information that somebody else who's calling doesn't have, right?
100%.
And that helps us as police put all the pieces together and, get the real story or more of a story out as we're going to a call and trying to deal with the situation, right?
And I think people might not realize that if you do hang up on that phone call, we actually do call you back. We have a person that's dedicated to phoning back any calls that hang up. Mm-hmm. So we will always call back and make sure that the person that did dial in is okay, even if it was an accident.
Yeah, excellent.
And if you do dial by accident, again, staying on the line is the best thing to do. We're okay with accidents. Nobody gets mad.
And I think that's important, right? And that's important, for all the adults out there watching today and listening, have that conversation with your children, right? If they dial 911 because they're curious, or if they dial 911 because, it was an accident or they were playing with the phone, tell them not to hang up right away. Tell them to give the phone to mom or dad or whoever's taking care of them that day, and let them talk to somebody in the operating room, right? Because as they call 911, we want to make sure that everything's okay. And if you call and hang up, we think something's wrong,
right,
and we're going to try and send officers to that address or that house or wherever that call's come from, right?
That's right.
So I think it's important. Just make sure parents, you have that conversation with your kids. Nobody's in trouble. Nobody's looking to, yell at anybody for anything like that, right? We just want to make sure everybody's okay because we do get important calls where somebody calls and hangs up and needs help, whether they can't talk, they've fallen, right? They've maybe become unconscious, that sort of thing. So it's real important for us to know those what, where, when, and hows, right? If we can get that information. So if you do make a mistake, don't hang up. And, you know, if the phone does ring back, because you did hang up, please pick up the phone and talk to the operator. So what's your current role now in communication?
So I am a communications supervisor. I was one of the training officers before that. So there are lots of opportunities once you get in there to do something different. Granted, we tend to stick around for a long time, so that's a factor in there. But currently I'm working on a special project. So I'm called the PSAP coordinator. And part of that role is just what's coming up with 911. We're currently in what's called E911, which is enhanced 911, which means your cell phone can dial in and we will get your location. It might not be that, there might be a radius where that's involved, so it's not completely accurate. So in the future, there's going to be something called NG911, which is Next Generation 911.
Okay.
And Hamilton Police is at the initial stages of upgrading to that system.
Excellent. And, you know, that brings up a couple of good points, right? Life has changed over the last few years, you know, and as everything's evolving, how has COVID affected how we handle business in the radio room?
COVID's a very tricky situation because we are a large group of people in a small room and we are answering the 911s for 500,000 plus people. So it is important to try and protect those people in there. We do have the barriers in the room, and initially at the onset of COVID, the command staff, including the chief, made a really smart decision to take the dispatch group, so those 3 people on this side, they decided to split our shift in half and move half of us to a different location. So we dispatched out of a different location than our call takers. So there was 5 people in one spot and 5 people in another spot.
Excellent. So you can actually do your job from multiple buildings then?
Yes. It's always important to have a backup.
Yeah, I was going to say, you know, usually a question I get is, well, what happens if the power goes out?
Yeah.
How do I call 911? Can I call 911? You know, it sounds like we have a solution for that. Do you have to run to another building? How does that work? If the power was to go out in Central, do you have backup generators to keep things running?
So yes, we do have backup UPS systems in-house, but we also do have a separate location for if we ever had to evacuate the room for whatever reason. There is a site we go to that we do test annually to make sure everything operates up there, and we have worked up there a couple of times.
Perfect. It looks like my producers give me a signal there. We have a question from one of our audience members.
Oh.
Just wondering what would happen if everything were to go down. Like if all the technology failed. I know there's been something called cards that you guys have had to do in the past. If you could just basically talk a little bit about that.
Sure. So back in the day, in the 1970s, the dispatchers used to write on pieces of paper. So you would call in on your home phone with your little rotary dial 911, and we would write it down on a card and pass it over to the dispatcher, who would then dispatch it, and then they would file those cards in a filing cabinet somewhere. So we still use that technology. It's not broken. So that's what we would do, is we would go to cards.
Excellent. And I think that's a valid concern, right? People always want to know what happens when the power goes out. What if technology fails us? Because, you know, we've all not had our cell phones work, the TV won't turn on, right? We've all had these glitches with technology. So it's important to remember that, you know, keep calling 911. We do have ways to handle it, and we do have ways to get you help, right? So no matter what's happening, you know, we have a solution, which I think is good, right? And so during COVID, did we see more calls, less calls? Did things change, you know?
We actually saw less calls.
Oh, we did, okay.
Ironically, yeah.
Excellent. And
Dipped a little bit. Not significant, but enough.
do you know how many calls you take a year in the radio room?
I do. We take about 420,000 calls a year. Does that include your 911s and your admins?
Okay. And out of those calls, is everybody looking for, you know, immediate help, or is it broken down? Is that number, you know, subdivided into how we need a 911 call, or, you know, something's a general information, or somebody just wants to make a report?
So about 210,000 of those are 911 calls. They're initiated on 911. It doesn't mean that if you called the admin line, you didn't have an emergency.
Yes.
We do get the lovely citizens who call on the admin line because they're afraid to use 911, but they have a real emergency that they could have called 911 for.
For sure, yeah. And, that makes another good point. The operators in the communications room, after hours and on weekends, when we don't have somebody answering the phone and you're calling Central Station, you're getting one of those operators trying to direct your
Yes.
call to somebody, right? So you don't just handle 911 calls, nights and weekends and after hours and things. You handle all the calls, that are coming in on that administration or non-emergency line that we call it, right?
Yes, we certainly do.
Excellent. Oh, I think we have another question.
Yeah, if you don't mind going over just briefly how someone that's interested in this type of career could get hired, and then maybe go over some of the roles and different opportunities within the radio room.
So whenever the Hamilton Police Service is hiring for communications operators, it is posted on the city website.
Okay.
And is posted internally as well. If there's anyone that's internal that wants to apply, that's maybe a records clerk that's decided that they want to try something different, they have the opportunity to apply as well. Once the person applies, our HR department gets involved. They do a series of tests for them, there's interviews, and then the person is welcome to come sit in the room, and they get to do what we call a sit-in, and they'll sit in and listen to the calls and make sure this is something they're interested in. And then they'll go through the process from there. They'll get hired on, and they will spend quite a bit of time in a classroom. We split it up so that you learn how to take 911 calls first. So you get call taker training first. That's about 6 weeks, maybe 7 in classroom. And then, I'm wrong there. It's 2 to 3 weeks in classroom. It's 6 to 7 outside of the classroom on the floor with a live operator.
So getting some on-the-job training.
Yes.
Okay.
And they have a task list of things that you cover from there. And then once the call taking is successfully completed, that person then goes back into the classroom for 2 to 3 weeks, and they do a dispatch training class.
Okay.
They have guest speakers such as yourself
Yep.
come in and talk to them about really interesting subjects. They have the canine officers come in, the tactical unit. So they really do get a good training base of what kind of things they'll experience.
Yeah,
And then
excellent.
they go back out onto the floor for 6 to 7 weeks. It is hours, and I can't remember the hours,
Sure.
of dispatch training.
Yep.
And that also gives them a chance to hone their call-taking skills as well.
Okay. So from the moment, somebody gets hired as a dispatcher or operator to the moment they can be let on their own, roughly how much time does it take?
Probably about 6 months, I would say, 4 to 6
Okay.
months.
So that's some good training, right?
But you're still learning for a couple of years after that. For
Absolutely, right? I'm trying to compare it to an officer, right? So how does an officer go? So you have very similar training, and you put in the same squad, so you guys do a lot of the same work as an officer, right? You do the same amount of training, the same shift schedule and that sort of thing. So it's important for people to know, maybe, and kind of compare it, right? That you guys are right alongside us the whole time with your total careers, right? So that's fantastic.
Yeah, and you can't cover everything in training. Like, as soon as you're done training, you will definitely get a call that you've never had before, and you're all on your own. But you do have a person beside you that you can turn to ask.
Yeah, perfect. You can always lean on some experience in the room, right? Which I think is fantastic as well, right? Do we have another question?
Yeah, just wondering, in your opinion, what characteristics or skills make a good 911 communications operator?
So traditionally, from all of the books I've read, a type A personality, which I'm not saying I have, is perfect for the job. Someone that loves to multitask, also great for the job. Those would be the only 2 things I can really think of offhand.
And when we say type A, that's basically you're looking for somebody who's a calm individual, right? Who's well spoken and can communicate well, right? So they look for so-called type A personalities for officers as well, but overall we're looking for somebody who can communicate well, and that's through speech, language, right? Written, so that when somebody calls, there's a calming person. When you're in crisis and you're calling for help at 911, you're not thinking about anybody else, right? So when we look at some of these people who do call into the room there, you know, their life is ending, right? It's crashing, you know, something minor to somebody else is major to them, right?
Definitely.
And it really helps to have somebody on the other end of that phone who's, you know, very calm and concerned for them and willing to help, right? So the world of technology is changing.
Yes.
And I'm sure over your time in there, you've seen things change. What does the future bring for the communications room?
There's a lot of change, I would say, coming up in the next 4 years. So currently, if you want to text 911, that is a possibility for the deaf, hard of hearing, and speech impaired communities of
Okay.
Hamilton. What those people would do is they would go to their cell phone provider, they'd get set up on their cell phone, and they have the ability to text to 911. We train on that. We don't get a lot of calls, but we do get some. So
Okay.
it is like a training thing that we do every month to make sure we stay current and we can help
Yep.
everybody in an emergency.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
So in the future, in the next, I would say 4 years, it's going to be available to everybody within Canada to text with 911. And it's
Okay.
something called real-time text,
Okay.
where the conversation on the text is much like you and I talking. I can see
Yeah.
what you're typing character by character, thought
Perfect.
by thought. I can see you delete things.
Yeah.
So
That's fantastic, you know, and I see that helping a lot of people in a lot of different ways. You know, we spoke about the deaf, but maybe somebody wants to contact 911, they don't want to talk. You know, as an officer, I do a lot of safety talks for people, and I always tell them, if you're in a situation and you need help, you know, just hit that emergency 911 button on your phone, leave it in your pocket, and
100%.
generally talk. But sometimes they can't, but they could text.
they could.
So they could, you know, if somebody's in danger, they could pretend they're texting a friend or a coworker. Meanwhile, they're texting with the 911 operator, right?
Yes.
So they're trying to get help there as fast as possible without letting somebody know that they've called for help, right? So
Yeah.
I think that's fantastic, right?
And voice is always present on that, so we can always hear background noise. I have had people call 911 that could not speak. They've left their cell phone out, so we can hear that there's a disturbance going on, and we've gotten them help.
Yeah, perfect, right?
So that is
Yeah.
a good tip, actually.
Yeah, fantastic, right? And that's awesome that we can help that, you know, amount of people in so many different ways. It's not just calling and answering the phone and then
No.
speaking to the phone, right? We do have other things that we can. Is there any tips or tricks for people? I know I see social media all the time and people saying things about calling 911 and, you know, they're using hand gestures and signals and things like that. Is there anything you guys use in the room there or specific to that that you could let the viewers know about?
In what way?
So like in social media, there's, you know, we get questions all the time about social media. Pretend you're ordering a pizza or, you know,
that
things
is
like that, right?
I've heard the pizza one
Yes.
too. Nobody has ever called. If you called me to order a pizza, I would have a 50-50. Did you get the wrong number and you want a pizza? Or
Yeah.
is this TikTok thing that I've seen where you're trying to tell me you're having a domestic?
Yeah, exactly, right?
We're not
So-
trained on that. We would definitely, if you called and you acted very like you were talking to a friend or ordering a pizza, obviously we would think something is up and we'll send the police over.
But it's up to
But
interpretation,
I have had
right?
people call me about their pizza, so
Yeah.
it's really a toss-up.
Well, we get calls about a lot of things, I'm sure, right, that are non-police related.
100%.
But, you know, in keeping with that theme, you know, if you're seeing things on social media, you know, TikTok especially, are these things where people are trying to come up with new ways, just remember, if you're trying to do something like that, the person answering the phone may not understand you, right? Plain language, being clear, that's why I think this texting app can really help. You know, or just putting your phone down or leaving it in your pocket and just giving things like your address, your name, right? A phone number, something, so that the person on the other line says, this seems strange.
Well, and just so you
and
know, the
send
phone
help.
number does show up, so, and we know who your cell phone provider is. So
Okay.
if we can articulate that you called and there's an open line and I can hear a disturbance, your cell provider will tell me your subscriber address
Oh, okay.
through a humanitarian letter. Like, everything is done legally, but it is
Mhm.
only in an emergency, but we can get help to anyone.
Yeah, perfect. So anything else in technology happening in the room? I know you see all these screens all the time. Is things moving along at a slow pace, or are we making leaps and bounds? Has COVID changed anything? COVID's changed a lot for my department, but has it changed much for your department?
Not really. COVID hasn't changed much technology-wise, no. Certain people can work remotely, but unfortunately, we don't have the capability to have the 911 operators working at home. I know in the States, there are a few places that have been doing that, where during COVID, they had their operators at home,
Yep.
and then they had their dispatchers at home. We just did what was safest logistically and split
Perfect, right?
people up.
And I
We
think-
have had some upgrades, though.
Yeah.
So we did have a computer upgrade recently that we went through. We have had our recording system, which all of the 911s are recorded on for court purposes or freedom of information purposes. That's been upgraded. And in the next several years, along with the city and the fire department and in cooperation with EMS,
Oh,
we are
fantastic.
going to be moving forward with more upgrades to support NG 911.
Excellent. Yeah, that sounds good. Now I'm going to ask you a question. As police, we get asked questions a lot, and I'm going to put it over to you and see. You know, people want to know. It's a very stressful job we have. How do you handle that stress? Does the service provide anything? How do you handle it yourself? You know, as officers, we all have our own thing that we try to do to handle the stress. You know, answering these calls has to be just as stressful for you as it does for the police going to the call, right? So how do you guys take care of that?
So each of us has what works for us. We do have a crisis intervention response team that if you take a stressful call, they will get in contact with you right away. They'll give you some key tips to go through. We have employee assistance programs. Personally, anything that involves kids usually will bother me, which I noticed early on. I have a great support system. My sister works for Hamilton Police. She's the one that convinced me to join part-time.
Fantastic.
So, and I know I can always talk to her if I have an issue. I've got a great family. Getting involved within the community works, but truly, it is a very stressful job, but just knowing that you've helped the person on the other end of the line, like, it keeps things in perspective.
Yeah, it can be very
And-
rewarding.
And
right?
reminding yourself that you didn't cause the emergency, you're just there to help it.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, mental health I think is very important, you know, in everybody's job in every aspect of life, and it's nice to know that, you know, there's things there for you that the service is providing for you, right? So you have the CERT team, and you know, we have other things there that if you were feeling you know you needed some time off or you needed to talk to somebody just to kind of get some feelings out, you know, there's no shame in any of that.
Absolutely
And it's
not.
important to do it before it becomes a problem, right? That,
And we have our coworkers sitting beside us too. They can usually
Yeah.
tell when something bothers you, and they'll make sure that you're taken care of. They'll text you, they'll get together with you. It really
Fantastic.
is like a group.
yeah.
And even the officers, if I take a 911 call, I don't always know what happened after I hang up. So
Yeah.
somebody could have been choking or whatever the situation is, and I hang up. A lot of our officers, well, actually all of them, are great. They will either come in or they'll give us a call and say, listen, what you did really helped. This is, the person's okay, whatever. We'll have like a peace of mind.
Yeah, perfect. So they
knowing.
try and close that loop for
There
you, so
is
you're
some
not
closure.
wondering what happened, right? Because I know, you know, from answering those calls and going in patrol and running to scenes and things can get a little hectic, and you forget about, you know, the person who took the call and isn't listening anymore or isn't there, right? And there can be that lull, and I'm sure a short period of time can feel like a long period of time when we're trying to save somebody's life or get somebody much needed help, right, when they're in
Yes.
crisis. So, you know, I think that's fantastic. The officers are doing that for you guys just to try and help round everything right out. So now we got anything you think the public should know about communications or calling 911?
I just want to give a shout out to the communicators, actually. It's a job where you don't expect things by any means, and it's rarely ever given, but there are a couple of times where a citizen has thanked me, and it really does mean a lot. Like, it is a hard job. You're left with a voice on the line, and your imagination can get the better of you, unfortunately, and it's usually way worse than whatever happened.
Yeah, for
So just those communicators that are in that rim, working through COVID, the amount of overtime people have worked to make sure that we're fully staffed, it's actually insane.
Yeah, the flexibility
I
of moving
admire
to a
every one
different
of them.
building, right?
Mhm.
And, you know, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on my show today, because you're kind of the voice behind the people, right? Everybody sees the uniform, they see police when they show up, but they forget that we're a team.
And I don't want to
it's
leave
a
out
big
our
team,
I
right?
don't want to leave out our switchboard operators either. They've also taken a huge they take a huge stress off the room because they field calls and they'll try to make sure the person gets who they really need and not always put them through. So they've also worked through COVID like troopers.
Yeah, perfect. No, we want to thank everybody, you know, in the building down there, and you know, we appreciate everything that you guys do for us, and I'm sure the citizens appreciate everything that you do for them. And Lisa, thank you for
Thank
coming
you.
on today and sharing a little bit of your experience. And thank you, Hamilton, for tuning in again for another version of Virtual Coffee with a Cop. Until next time.